was halfway to my place of employment, and because of accidents, I actually turned around and came home to work from my at-home bunker. And as Dom mentioned, I think we're getting a little tired of doing things online, and we want to get back to in-person events as soon as possible. And certainly this presentation is really designed for that in-person interaction. And so we encourage you use the chat function, and let's have a dialogue on this. This may be a presentation that may be a little bit different than what you've seen before. It's more about soft skills, and maybe there's some pearls in here that you can take away. And admittedly, a lot of this is some lesson learning from my journey and former life in active duty military. So without further ado, let me go ahead and screen share and we'll get started. So the topic for today was safety in high-performing organizations, and what is the secret sauce? And I by no means have all the answers here, so let me just state that right up front. It is a real honor to be amongst this group, and I commend Dom and Lisa for hosting these safety events. It's not trivial to get all this coordinated and organized, and try to think through some of the key topics that are relevant to our industry to make us all safer, to be honest with you. But again, it's a real pleasure to be here and presenting this brief, which again, it could be a little bit different and hopefully stimulate a little bit of critical thinking. So with that, let's see if I can advance. Here we go. So I gave this brief not long ago to a different audience, to a lot of business aviation entities, and I decided to kind of throw out a scenario just to kind of set the stage for this critical thinking. Because in many cases, we're faced with these types of challenges and the decisions don't come easy. So this is the scenario that I put forward, and then we will go through the brief, and then if we have time, I'll put this back up again and just see what your thoughts are on how you might handle the situation. But basically, the scenario here is that you have a principal that you fly in a Part 91 corporate flight department. He has a preferred crew, which isn't unusual. And in this case, the captain decides that he really wants everybody to be wearing a mask, and that includes the principal. And you haven't had this conversation with the company leader yet, and you might think that this could be a problem, because it doesn't necessarily comply with the strict interpretations of the protocols that you had already put in place. Now, you may be wondering why I chose the Coast Guard as kind of the underpinning of this presentation. I noticed that you've got a Coast Guard presentation or presentation from a Coast Guard individual later in the day, so hopefully he'll appreciate that I used his organization. But here is the reason I did that, is because the Coast Guard is really, without a doubt, a very high-performing organization. And isn't it true that they have to assume risk on our behalf when perhaps we didn't make such good risk decisions? And so that's why I chose the Coast Guard. So how do they do this, and how do they do it safely time and again? You know, their motto, Semper Paratus, always ready, is a good one. And we'll talk about these types of things. But I mean, you take a look at these kind of conditions that they have to endure in performing rescues. It's pretty amazing, to be honest with you. This isn't rookie stuff here, nor for the faint of heart. So clearly they have some secret sauce ingredients that they're using to make sure that they're not putting themselves in undue danger or harm in performing this mission. And so I say that they perhaps have a culture of excellence, and we're going to scratch pretty hard on this culture piece as we go through this presentation. So I like to make a distinction between risk managers and risk controllers. And so, you know, many of us in our aviation careers are really active risk controllers. So we're dealing with hazards and putting mitigations in place and making aeronautical decisions, operational risk management calls all the time. I mean, that's what we do. That's what's expected. And doing that effectively and probably with a jaundice towards conservatism is really what will provide us a very long career in aviation without any major mishap or accident. Risk managers are really at a much higher level, if you will, that have to balance risk versus reward on a more grand scale. And these decisions are really can be quite hard, as you'll see going forward here. I like to use this example with General Patton as he was briefing the troops before Operation Overlord. Now, it probably goes without saying that he knew that he was putting his troops into a real meat grinder here and trying to motivate them on a mission that was going to be quite challenging. So I use this because here's an extreme case where really we're going to have to go do this mission, and we're really going to put ourselves at extreme risk. So how do you balance this? I like this recent example. So here was the crew that actually rescued several hundred people from the Creek Fire in California recently, and were awarded Distinguished Flying Crosses by the president. Now here's kind of the tightrope that we walk on this. So the other helicopter operators in the area claimed that it was too dangerous to go do this mission, but this crew decided that the risk-reward balance was achievable. There was a decision made somewhere. It may not have been strictly within this helicopter, but they were successful. Now imagine had it not gone successful, where would that accountability be? And so, as I said, some of these decisions are quite challenging, and I think you have to be careful with folks that are really mission focused, highly mission focused, and the military is definitely in this category. And balancing good, prudent decision making and reasonableness in the risk decision making against the potential consequences. So here's a couple of leadership lesson takeaways. Yes, it's good to stay mission focused and make good decisions, and really you should arm yourself with as much information as possible. And sometimes we don't have that advantage. So we have to make the decisions based on the information that we have. I had a really wise commanding officer one time, as I was early in my military career, that suggested that we should have the ability to dial down our aggressiveness. And so I kind of like that optic of the risk rheostat, where we have the ability to dial down our risk acceptance tolerance at different points in time or space. And so I like this. You need to be aggressive, obviously, when you're in combat. If you're not in combat and you're in training, you don't need to be as aggressive. So there was an adage, train like you fight, but there's some caveats to that, right? And I think you can all understand that. Communication, open and transparent communication, I think, is key. And this picture on an aircraft carrier, arguably one of the most dangerous places to work. And you're bringing together individuals from different walks of life, certainly, and experiences, but also from different organizations. So they're not all reporting to the same person. So it takes some real courage sometimes to get up in front of people and make it clear on what the expectation is, and make sure that we're watching out for each other so that we don't get ourselves hurt or killed. Tragically, it happens every once in a while, but there's so many saves that you don't hear about. And think about it for a second. You really don't hear that many issues related to at-sea accidents. I mean, we have them. And it does happen, but it's quite rare. So in talking about communications, not being wishy-washy about it, being concise about what you're telling your people and the expectations, I think that can be very helpful. If you're masking information, they'll know it. Trust me. They are surprisingly in tune to what is going on. And so it's really important to keep that string taut so that you're not just hearing, but you're listening, active listening. And this is arguably one of probably the biggest challenges for me, is to really pay attention to what people are saying and engage in what they have to say. That's an important takeaway here. So here was a situation which was really the longest 20 minutes in my career. We were doing an exercise out of Fallon, Nevada, which is where we kind of do our graduate level exercise before going on deployment. And this is when I had an F-18 squadron. And at the time, you know, we, in the readiness to go on deployments, obviously we have what we call a readiness bathtub. So we tend to get a little rusty. We have airplanes that are in modification and repair. Obviously, we've got to reconstitute the force, as it will, before we go out on the next deployment. And so at the time, we only had 6 airplanes. And the general philosophy was, is you bring 6 airplanes to the detachment to make sure that you can fly a solid schedule of 4 airplanes. So you know, we'll have maintenance issues while we're there. Anyway, we were conducting a large force exercise very early on. And when I say large force, we're probably talking 30 to 40 airplanes here to include adversary opposition. And this was a case where the wingman hit his flight lead. Golden rule, can't hit your flight lead when you're flying formation. But it's more complicated than that. I don't want to get into all the details, but the flight lead's airplane, the vertical tails were taken off of his airplane. He was out of control up at flight level 350-ish and ejected there. And I think we have the highest recorded ejection out of an F-18 out of this event. And then the wingman was able to successfully recover the airplane with half a wing back at the base. During that time where we didn't know if the flight lead was alive or dead was obviously excruciating. And then the best news ever when the search and rescue helicopter got to the scene and reported that the pilot was sitting on the hood of a hunter's vehicle drinking a Pepsi, wait for the helicopter, and his first words were, "What took you so long?" So I wanted to kind of share that with you just because it sets the stage for this situation. At that very moment, we were down to 4 airplanes. Even though our sister squadron offered to allow us to fly their airplanes, I really didn't want to do that. So I arguably went at some risk by getting our people together to assure them it wasn't a maintenance issue, that it was an error, and that we were going to get through this. But I wanted to try to complete the detachment with the 4 airplanes that we had remaining. Now, that can go both ways. We can either be heroes and we can do this and accomplish this, or we could really fall flat and accept an airplane that's not mission capable, not safe. And I wanted to make sure that they knew that distinction, that we weren't going to fly questionable airplanes. It just wasn't worth the risk. And so I wanted them to make sure that I wasn't pushing too hard on this, that it was just a goal, aspirational, and not a requirement. Anyway, so when we come back from a flight, we dive the ducts and check for FOD damage in the engines. And these airplanes are very susceptible, low slung intakes, very susceptible to FOD damage. And so this young sailor, in fact, it takes a running start to get in this intake. You really can't even see the fan face here in this photograph. So it requires a running start to get up in there. And of course, you have to take all the sharp objects and FOD off your person when you do this. And really, you're just looking for general condition on the face of the engine. He actually saw damage further in the engine. So he didn't do his job at the minimum level. He actually went above and beyond and saw something by doing a more detailed inspection. And at that moment, I thought, well, I think it's important to recognize this. So we huddled the maintenance department out on the ramp at that very moment that word came back in, and pinned a medal on his chest, because I wanted to reinforce that the behavior is exactly what we're after. That at some point in his head, he probably thought, well, gosh, if I say something, then we're not going to be able to make all the sorties and accomplish this detachment with this airplane. But no, he climbed out and immediately reported it to his chief, and we were able to actually get a replacement engine on site and change it out that night. That's a beauty of the F-18, by the way. The Blue Angels can actually do an engine change in about 30, 45 minutes. It's really something to see. And we did accomplish the remainder of the detachment with the 4 airplanes. So that was something that we could celebrate. So anyway, that's kind of my story on motivation, even when the chips are down. And you don't know if you're going to get fired. You don't know what you're going to do with the pilot, in this case, who, by the way, went on to continue flying. It was a very expensive mistake, obviously. But when you look at all the conditions in total that we were flying in, and the preparation, this was an error, not a violation. And we'll get to that more in a minute. And then recognizing folks and reinforcing positive things that are going on, not just keep harping on negative. Some of you may remember this accident. It was on national news, and it was real tragedy back in 2008. The story behind this is that this young Marine lieutenant was out doing carrier qualifications as he was learning to fly the F-18. Now, when we do these evolutions, we always have a designated divert field, and at the time that was North Island in San Diego there. And the squadron was based at Miramar, so the Navy left and the Marine Corps took over that base. He had an engine issue while at the ship and shut the engine down. The airplane flies just flying on one engine, but it's still an emergency situation, and you need to get to a suitable airport. So he was heading to the divert field, single engine, and he checked in with his base. And the commanding officer and the operations officer, as I understand it, got on the radio and said, well, look, the airplane's flying just fine. Just bring it to Miramar. We'll stick you in a new airplane and get you back out to the ship so you can complete your carrier qualifications. Well, that probably was not as well known. There is an instruction that says you shall not overfly a suitable landing field as a matter of convenience. And so that there was a violation there. And in the end, I think 13 Marines, to include some very fine officers, were fired over this event, because what happened was that there was a rag in the bottom of the fuel tank that precluded the ejector pump from working properly. So there was plenty of gas in the airplane. It's just that it couldn't be fed to the one remaining operating engine. There were some hard lessons here. Number one is that the airplane was actually telling us that there was a problem. It just doesn't manifest itself until you are in a degraded situation, in this case, single engine. So we actually changed that. The maintenance codes that the airplanes provide tell us a lot, but we did not have a list for those types of maintenance issues. I think this lieutenant, who's probably a colonel by now, or lieutenant colonel, if he's still active duty, went on to continue flying. He was not punished for this event. And further, the individual that's quoted at the bottom there, an amazing response to this. Mr. Yoon lost both his wife, his mother-in-law, and his 2 and 15-month-old babies in this accident. And yet he had the moral fortitude to not blame the pilot in this case. Which brings me to HFACS. So you've heard me talk about errors and violations, and so I'm not sure your awareness of HFACS for those that are really leaning heavily into the safety practitioner type of realm. But there are other taxonomies that are out there, but the military uses this one, and it's a good one because it forces you to look beyond just what appears to be the obvious causal factors in an accident. And it starts with the unsafe action of the operator, trying to make that distinction between a violation and an error, because just culture would tell you that you're not supposed to punish for an honest mistake. And as I said, even in our accident, we made sure that even though it was a very expensive mistake, it was not held as a violation and deserved significant punishment. And then you go up the levels there, and I will tell you that when you get into supervision and organizational influences, you start to make people really squirm, because what you usually find, take whatever optic you like, but there's always links in the chain in the accident. And there's usually other conditions that are existent that result in things that aren't corrected, and then they manifest themselves in a dangerous condition, and then a tragedy downstream. So I just wanted to bring that up, and it's so very important to ask 5 whys or use a taxonomy such as this when you do your investigations, whether it's an occupational industrial event or an aviation safety event. Now, of course, for the military, I like to think that we embrace a notion of absolute accountability, which the analogy I like to use is that if the ship runs aground while the captain's in his bunk, the captain's still going to get fired. Now, he may take the watch bridge individuals with him, but that's absolute accountability. So nobody shies away from that. It's an awesome responsibility, and it works quite well. But I think at the same time, we should all be humble in the way we approach our accountabilities and responsibilities, and always embrace a continuous philosophy of learning and education as we go through our respective careers. Now, so I've got a picture of my family, and then I jokingly called this my second family. So this was my F-18 squadron personnel on the Enterprise before it was decommissioned. I had 12 airplanes. I had 225 people. And when I put this slide up, and it may be a little bit difficult to see online, but first question I ask is, what do you see in that sea of faces? And I'm always struck that the answer I get is diversity. And I appreciate that answer because we did. We had females, we had blacks, we had Hispanics. We didn't really have issues. We got along as a team. And now, it wasn't without its challenges. The average age is about 22 or 23. A lot of the younger folks came from broken homes, maybe had some, maybe they were dabbling in some criminal activity, not major, but, and many folks ended up at a recruiting station and really had no North Star or moral compass established quite yet. And so there was ample opportunity here to really influence and mold young lives and try to encourage them to aspire to higher goals and accomplishments. And you see the different colored jerseys, and you saw that in a previous picture, and those just define different roles and responsibilities, which makes it easier to identify who you need and who could really help out at a given time. So when we embark on the ship, we actually have to contribute, if you will, to the ship's company crew and their complement for heads and beds types of things. So cooking, cleaning, laundry, etc. So that's the first kind of experience they get in an aviation squadron. They go, well, I want to, actually maintain F-18s, and now I'm washing dishes. Well, so that can really discourage a lot of people. And so I made a point to do what I call come-arounds. And so I'd get some other leaders in the squadron, and we would walk around the ship. Some people call that leadership by walking about, and I agree with it. It's very powerful to make sure that they still knew that they belonged to our squadron, and we were going to look out for them. And if they had any issues, to make sure that they let us know. So very rewarding. This was really special for me. And at the time, I was only 38. I'm 38 years old with this level of responsibility and accountability. And I wanted to make sure that they understood that I wanted everybody to come home safe, and how we were going to accomplish that, because this is really dangerous business. But remember, we're talking about a mission that's very important. And so the readiness of the airplanes is crucial. Every single person has to contribute to this, because what's the point? We're going to put ourselves at risk by launching off an aircraft carrier with a steam catapult in the middle of an inky black night to go put ourselves into harm's way to fire our way into a target. And if the bombs don't explode, then it was all for naught. How do you make the connection? One of the things that I like to use is a pride and ownership. So if you look at the bottom left picture there, you notice that there's another name on the airplane besides the pilot's name underneath the windscreen. And this is one of the things that we thought was very powerful, actually, is to put these young sailors' names on the airplane. I took that a step further, actually. So I said, well, look, I've got, 15 pilots, and I've got a handful of ground officers as well that don't get any real notoriety or connection with the airplane. So I said, well, I've got the right-hand side of the airplane, and I've got 12 airplanes. So I put the ground officers' names on the right-hand side of the airplanes. And I will tell you that they really thought that was special. But I said, hey, it comes with a price. You have to go do a material condition inspection, corrosion inspection on the airplanes with the sailors. And that's the way we rolled. And I will tell you that I thought the material condition of our airplanes were quite good. But these young individuals are the last ones that actually give you a hand salute as you're turned over to the yellow shirt and get taxied up to the catapult. They're the ones that, when the tail is over the water, check the oil and make sure everything is good to go. I'm certainly not going to do that. So there's a high level of trust that is required here. And if you can instill that sense of pride and professionalism, pride and ownership, it's amazing what these young individuals will do. This is not trivial work. I mean, this is really tough business. There's no shifts. I mean, there's just one set of folks that are doing this for 12 hours a day. So on the back, we have challenge coins, and many of you have seen challenge coins before, but I like the term service beyond self. And so that's what I chose to put on my challenge coin on the back. And we talked about this pride and ownership, and I would say the biggest foot stomp here is trying to develop a sense of trust with the people that you interface with, because we simply can't do our aviation business without good trust. Now I'm going to see if I can get this video to play here, and we can talk a little bit about this. What you're seeing here is the pilot landing aid television, and so it's a camera mounted in the flight deck. And it looks aft, and everybody on the ship watches every landing. So you can't hide anything. And really, we compete against each other. It's fierce competition, but it's at least something to kind of hang your hat on. In this case, what you're going to see is the deck's moving around a little bit, but not that bad. And they're actually using a manually operated glide path indication. So the landing signal officer is actually using a manual control for what we call the meatball. That's what you see over here on the left side of the screen. So let me see if this will go ahead and run. Looks like we have success. So the LSOs are given the glide path signals to the pilot. You can see the deck is moving around a little bit here. That's a scary video. What you saw there, besides the individual running across the flight deck, was a perfectly flown wave off. But you can see, once you get in close and you apply power, there's a period of time where you're still in a rate of descent when the LSO told the aircraft to wave off. Thankfully, the pilot did an extraordinary job in performing that, because if you don't fly it perfectly, then you run the risk of having an in-flight engagement, and that could damage the airplane. And that gets very exciting. So that was one of my best sailors that was running across the flight deck. Thankfully, he didn't stop. He kept running when he realized what was going on. The backstory in this is that we start engines for a launch 30 minutes prior. Now you think, well, gosh, that's a long time. Well, it can be if your airplane is perfect and you have no issues. It's not a big deal. Now remember, about 15 minutes prior, they're going to want to start moving airplanes and stacking them efficiently so that they can get you to the catapult hooked up and shot. So really, you've got about 15, 20 minutes of real troubleshooting time if you have a problem. Well, we were in an atypical place. We were over on the port side of the ship, which is not a usual place where we would be stuck trying to do maintenance troubleshooting. Now, the F-18 was a fabulous airplane in terms of sortie generation, and because it's a federated system, you have a problem, you can just swap out a black box and usually solve the problem and continue to go. So this avionics technician was really not that familiar with working over on that side of the flight deck, and he misinterpreted the signal from the arresting gear officer that it was clear to go ahead and cross. And so he went and then realized his mistake and realized how close to dying he came. At that very moment, I knew when word came down that he was going to get a serious butt chewing from the bridge. And I didn't want that to happen. Again, he's one of my best guys. This was a mistake. It was not intentional. Old school leadership of yelling and screaming wasn't going to solve anything. And when I got to him to tell him not to go up to the bridge, you know, he was in tears. I mean, he was shaking uncontrollably. He knew how close to dying he came. Thankfully, the air boss and the captain were both friends of mine, and gave me the courtesy of just seeing if he was okay, rather than yelling at him or otherwise. And at that moment, I think the rest of my sailors realized that I had their back. And that was very important for me anyway, that they realized that I was there to serve them as much as the other way around. So the leadership takeaways here is to be engaged with your people and show them that you'll do personal sacrifice on their behalf. When I gave this presentation to the other group, somebody had an issue with the word love. And I said, okay, fair enough. I'm not talking about marriage and kids here. I'm talking about having love in your heart so that you do show compassion and empathy to your people when the time is needed. And further, you're not afraid to dish out some tough love when needed. And frankly, we taught people about safe sex. We had to balance checkbooks. We went to people's apartments and helped them acquire furniture. And we had really tough conversations with spouses that really weren't prepared for their significant other going on a 6 to 9 month deployment. But that's the people I had were the people I had. I wasn't going to get anybody else. So if somebody got pregnant or tried to use some other excuse of not going on deployment, then the rest of us were going to have to pick up the slack. So I wanted to make sure that they all understood that this was a team effort, that everybody was crucial to completing the mission. All right, so I really like that picture on the top left. I just think that is really a cool picture. Very rarely would you ever see an F-18 without some external drop tanks, though, because these airplanes don't have a lot of gas, and they burn a lot of it, by the way. So they were probably launching on an air demonstration for the ship. So he probably had the rule of the roost here to just launch off and do an air demonstration, which is great fun, and then recover back aboard the ship. The landing gear on an F-18 is highly complex. I mean, it's an amazing engineering feat. And quite reliable, actually, but every once in a while there are issues. Well, anyway, we were doing a post-maintenance check flight on an airplane at Virginia Beach at the air station there at Oceana, and we couldn't get one of the main mounts out of the well. So we tried everything after we exhausted the procedures that were in the book, positive, negative G, and trying to blow the gear down. You name it, we tried everything. I was very worried about the pilot getting distracted and not paying attention to his fuel state. I didn't want to run us down and create more problems than we're trying to fix. So we called it quits and said, just set up for a landing. By this time, we had everybody out on the field that we needed to, including landing signal officers. He flew a perfect approach and arrested landing. And there was the wingtip and the aileron were scraped up, and that was it. There was no other damage. We had the airplane flying again in 2 days. I took our top quality assurance petty officer out to the airplane with me when they lifted up the wing, and then he got in there and shimmied something or other, and then the gear just popped right out. And then he went over and sat on his toolbox with his head in his hands, and I knew something wasn't right. He was the guy that did the QA inspection on the maintenance, and there was a castellated nut without the cotter key, and he missed it. So I had the difficult decision on how to deal with this and what message that was going to send to the rest of the squadron. We had what we call a non-putative letter of caution, which basically just is between he and I, and puts some basically on report and saying that, look, we expect better, and if it happens again, more serious things will happen. But I wasn't going to do anything more serious to him. I mean, he was a superstar, truly a rock star, and went on to make Chief Petty Officer, which is a big deal in the Navy. But these are, some of the difficult decisions that I was faced, and I felt compelled to explain some of my decisions, not all, to the rest of the squadron, because I wanted them to understand what I was thinking and what the expectations are. That we're going to need to stay focused and do quality work. If you make a mistake, hey, it's better to fess up, and let's all just watch out for each other and stay on the top of our game. Now, one of the things that I like to bring out in this portion of the presentation was we had a period of time where a lot of sailors and Marines were getting injured or killed in motorcycle accidents. And at the time, the Navy blamed senior enlisted leadership. And I thought that was really inappropriate to blame them because there was no regulations. It was unenforceable. So obviously everybody, when they put the motorcycle dealership right outside the front gate of the base, everybody wants to be cool and have a motorcycle. But that was just simply not, to me, the right way to do the engaged leadership, as I like to call it. In fact, the term that they were using was intrusive leadership, which to me is really completely the wrong signal to send. We all can be tactfully involved in what our people are doing and encouraging them to make the right decisions on and off duty, which is important, because I think we can all agree that if we have issues at home, it can definitely make its way into the workplace and have a negative consequence. So this was an interesting event, and I'm not a Hawker pilot. I'm not here to try to ding Hawkers, but when I talk to Hawker pilots about this situation, if you look carefully at the picture, the nose gear is already being retracted, and the mains are just breaking the surface. And they said that the only way that could happen is if somebody pre-selects the landing gear handle up while you're on the ground. And there's 2 paid pilots in this cockpit, in this airplane. That's it, just the 2 of them. So we've seen a lot of accidents that happen on non-revenue legs. Nobody else is in the airplane, it's just the crew, and then they do not maintain level of professionalism and discipline. And these types of things have happened. What's really interesting is that this occurred a couple of years ago at MBAA Static Display at base in Las Vegas at Henderson Field. So not only were they flat hatting, they were doing it in front of a large crowd and with a high bank angle after the departure. Looked good on a video, looks good on these pictures, but not the kind of thing that you want to see within the business aviation sector, obviously. Well, I have my own battle scar in this area, and we have air demonstration pilots for the various airframes, F-18s, F-35s, F-16s, F-15s, you name it. Now, the Air Force takes a little bit different stand on how they do this. They have a dedicated, when you get selected for that, you are the demo pilot for the year. The Navy doesn't do that. They rely on fleet squadrons, seagoing squadrons to do this. So it's completely different in my view in terms of the level of currency and proficiency in doing this type of activity. And it's very dangerous. Clearly, the professional teams like the Blue Angels, Thunderbirds, that's what they do. That's their bread and butter. That's not what we're talking about here. Well, anyway, the story is that my top lieutenant, who was also our chief tactics officer, was also our demonstration pilot. And he had been flying these demonstrations and wanted to do a couple after I assumed command of the squadron. And he knew that I was not supportive of this. But I acquiesced and I said, fine, you want to do these 2 air shows, then I will be part of your qualification program, which I was. He flew a very good, precise air demonstration. So I was very confident. Further, he was going to do the demonstration in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm from Louisville. And this is not your average show site. It's over the Ohio River. There's power lines. There's high-rise buildings. There's no takeoff and landing sequence to be flown at the Thunder over Louisville Air Show prior to the Kentucky Derby. So we went through this in detail and my expectations for flying a safe air show. And at the time, the wing commander really wanted to do this maneuver that you see here that the Super Hornet is performing. Now, we went through the maneuver library for the Super Hornet in great detail when I was at the Tucson River to make sure that it could be flown safely. And this is a very cool maneuver. So it's not exactly like the Blue Angels fly their dirty roll-on takeoff. Basically, this is a takeoff with the gear being retracted in the inverted position. But the flap position has to be an automatic, not half. Otherwise, something very bad would happen. So it's not, and the Blues learned that the hard way. They almost crashed an airplane by taking off in the wrong flap position. So this is something you got to be very careful with. But the legacy F-18, the A through D model F-18s had not been cleared for this maneuver. So I was completely dead set against doing this maneuver with the legacy airplane until Patuxent River and the test folks cleared it. Anyway, at the time, we were still using VHS tapes, and my dad always recorded the air show for me and then sent it in the mail. A couple weeks later, I get it, and I pop it in my VCR player. And what do I see? This very maneuver being flown. Of course, it wasn't after takeoff. It was an ad-libbed maneuver on a low pass, and then flown just like this. Completely violated my trust and confidence. So I grounded the pilot for several weeks. I probably could have pursued taking his wings, but I chose not to. But that's how I handled that. What's the point in all this? Well, you know, we're human. We're risk takers. We like to be rock stars. It's just part of our human nature, and understanding that human nature is really crucial for not only for ourselves and exercising a level of professionalism and restraint and discipline in our flying operations, but making sure that others are held accountable to that as well. So that was kind of my firm but fair story. And like I said before, you have to really discriminate those violations from the errors. And I like the cartoon there. So if they could figure out who did the knifing in the back, that they would get promoted. Certainly, we don't want that type of behavior. So I want to talk just quickly as we wrap up here about safety management systems. I think most of you all are familiar with this. It's not going away. It's not a fly-by-night acronym like some others that have come and gone. Safety management is here to stay. In fact, it's going to get more deeply ingrained following the Boeing 737 MAX event. And I think there's going to be some proposed rulemaking on the street quite shortly on this for manufacturers. But what you don't want in your organization is for Lisa, the safety guy, to be the only person holding up the whole safety program for your organization. That doesn't work. And my bumper sticker, I think, is true. And I found no one that's willing to argue with me on this, that if you do not have a positive safety culture, you're not going to get the safety benefits from your SMS. And people are just going to feel like it's more work, more cost, and just something that I guess we have to do. That's not what you want. It has to be top down. And the roles and responsibilities of the accountable executive need to be understood. And the dialogue needs to be more than just that. You have to walk the talk. I like this slide from Pat Hudson. I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but I think it's great, especially if you use this and you slide this across the table to somebody that is within your safety organization or in a leadership role within your organization and go, well, where do you think we are in this? And what you see, I think, if they're honest, is, ooh, maybe we're not quite as proactive as we really want to be. And that's good. If you can have that awakening, then that's goodness. When you see, down at the bottom where you're just dragging the people that make mistakes out to the firing squad, that's not going to solve your safety problems. In fact, it's probably going to make it worse, because when people see that behavior happening, guess what? They're either going to tell you what you want to hear or nothing at all. And that's not going to help. The best tactical information and intelligence you can get are from your frontline workers. Tony Kern, a name that may be familiar to most of you all, has some excellent books on these types of topics across the board. And he was kind enough to give me this graphic, which I really like because it kind of shows that, look, you can live in that middle portion where you're meeting the minimums and live in that area of mediocrity, as he calls it. Or you can aspire to be up in that top right segment in normalizing excellence. So his shtick is get away from normalizing deviant behavior and really aspire to these better characteristics for your organization and in your personal life. We have work to do. Embarrassingly, we still have lots of mishaps. Thankfully, most are not fatal, which unfortunately, when you look at accident data, you miss, I think, a clear picture of what's really happening here, because many of the close calls, the non-fatal accidents, were it not for luck, it would have been fatal. And we need to pay attention to this, and not just the ones that resulted in fatalities. So, see, my animations ruined it for me. I went through, when I first made this presentation, I wanted to pose the question, what is the secret sauce? And I go through the whole presentation without saying the L word. And I said, well, okay, I'm looking for one word and to answer this question. And it really is leadership, is it not? And establishing the culture that we need so that we can elevate organizations to higher level of excellence. And I think that, to me, is what's really key here. So I go back to this original scenario, which could be a tough challenge. So I at this point encourage you to get on the chat, ask any question you want. I mean, I really would prefer that we were in person, that we can do some direct engagement on some of these thoughts. Maybe you don't agree with me, and that's fine too. Like I said, I do not have ownership to this. I just wanted to share with you some of my experiences and thoughts on this from a leadership perspective. And I would agree that there are different levels of leadership, junior leadership to more senior leadership, and the methods that you use do vary a little bit. I like service before self, that I think if we embrace humility and a sense of service for those that are around us, I think that makes us more effective as leaders. So with that, I think Dom was going to come back in maybe with Lisa and see if we can't address some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. That was great. Does anybody have questions for Tom? You can either ask them by unmuting yourself, or please feel free to use the chat section via Ring Central on the side here. Don't be shy.
Still early, I guess. Well, let's start with this one. Does somebody want to chime in and maybe answer that predicament that we've got with asking the principal to wear a mask, or are we going to go back to the captain and say, look, do you mind coming off the germaphobe a little bit here? And once everybody's on the airplane, then we can go ahead and drop masks and go from there. Any thoughts there? And Dom, do you want me to come off screen share at this point? Would that help at all?
No, that's totally fine. Either keep screen share on or off is completely fine.
That's such a beautiful picture. I thought I'd just leave it up there.
Absolutely.
I wish I had one of those just to take out whenever I wanted.
Hey, Tom, this is Max. I have a question for you, a little bit of a deviation from what you were bringing up there, but do you have any takeaways for when we think about your leadership examples and professionalism examples there, about for those of us still in the single pilot or training environment, how we apply that to being a leader of one per se, or holding ourselves accountable to our own standard?
Max, great to hear from you. I'm glad you're tuning in this morning. Max is a personal hero of mine, was integral to putting a lot of the content together for the MBAA Safety Week that we recently completed. So yeah, that's a great question. And this is one that the MBAA Safety Committee's been working on as well, is how do you be more effective in small flight departments where we're doing peer leadership, is what I think you're getting at, Max. And, you know, I hear people saying, well, we're going to hold each other accountable. Well, if you're peers, how does that actually happen? I think differently about accountability. And to me, you almost have to have hiring and firing action to be able to really hold people accountable, to, you know, dock their pay and punish them in some way for a violation. But I think what you're getting at here is really important. So, you know, the situation where, going back to that Hawker event that I talked about before, there were 2 professional paid pilots in that cockpit. We did a video segment for the Bombardier safety stand down that talks right to the heart of this question, where the one pilot who was role playing for sake of this scenario was thinking, hey, I think we're going to do this low transition today and really wow the crowd at static display at base. The other pilot is obviously distressed. He's going, yeah, do you really think that's a good idea? So he's trying to talk the other guy down. He's doing all the right things. At some point, though, what if you're not making any headway? What are you going to do? And we hear about, sadly, we hear about situations where people are not happy with the culture within their organizations, and they're left in a conundrum. In some cases, maybe they have stability in their income situation where they can leave that organization. So they throw their arms up in the air and they just go, I'm not going to deal with it. This flight department is due for an accident, and I've tried everything that I can. Others feel like they have no option. There's no outlet, nobody to go to. They don't want to lose their job, and that's a very unfortunate situation to be in. So maybe to just kind of put a bow on it for Max, and hopefully I'm kind of at least addressing the issue, maybe not directly answering the question, because this is very tough to do peer leadership. But I agree that there are, as I mentioned before, there's different levels. And I think if we treat each other with dignity and respect, and we have the courage to at least engage with others if we don't feel like they're doing the appropriate thing, then I think we'll be far better off than if we do nothing. So let me see if that scratched the itch with Max, or if somebody else has some different thoughts on what I think he's getting at in terms of the peer leadership thing.
Yeah, that was exactly it, Tom, and that was great. And I've been in situations where I felt like there had to be some level of accountability brought with someone who I considered a friend, and it was very difficult. And I thought your connecting it to love was actually very salient and helpful in understanding that. So thank you.
Yeah, in fact, when we did the last 2 days of the MBAA Safety Week, we talked about fitness for duty, and there was an excellent mental health presentation. And if you look at the stressors that we all have to endure, job security, the uncertainty with COVID and the disruptions that are occurring, the sense that we feel like we got to stay on the grid more often. I mean, the environment is changing, and I think, unfortunately, not for the better in terms of our ability to manage our own personal fitness for duty. But to your point, Max, I think what's important is that engage with others and go, hey, you doing all right? You know, you look a little tired today. Anything going on at home? And unfortunately, in corporate Americana, that's much more difficult than in the military environment, because I think what people normally default to is it's none of your business, and that's terrible. Unfortunately, that we have to have that feeling, and hopefully leaders are in a position to build a culture that's not that way, that you can at least ask some questions about how you and your family are doing. What do you got planned for the weekend? You got any vacation plans coming up? And just see if they're burning the candle at both ends. What's going on? Maybe they've got marriage issues, financial issues. And sadly, we've seen those things adversely affect performance on the flight deck, even though we all have a sense of bravado and confidence that we can compartmentalize. Unfortunately, it does affect our decision making, and tragedy can strike. Thanks for the question, Max. Appreciate it. And great job again with the MBA work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Max. Are there any questions for Tom from the group? Input?
Hey, Tom. My name is Dale Alberti. I'm an adjunct here with SNHU and a pilot with JetBlue as well. Really funny that you bring up the peer leadership. I was having a conversation with my girlfriend last night, who is a teacher, and she's working with a small group to lesson plan units going out into the next month. And she presented a problem to me where her and her P felt like she was doing the majority of the work, and therefore all of it wasn't getting done, and they were fined. So at what point within this peer leadership, she's not in control of them, but at what point do you go to a superior, and this can be in education and aviation, at what point do you bring that to the higher level?
Yeah, Dale, that's I'm sorry, I stepped on somebody.
Oh, that's okay. It was me again. In aviation, I'm thinking, does it, do you let this evolve until it becomes a safety issue, or do you go and handle that at the higher level before it becomes, or before it gets to that point?
Yeah, really, what you described is really a tough situation. So in a non-aviation environment, we see this all the time, right? And there's, I call it, and this is not mine, but no good deed goes unpunished. So if you're a superior performer and you produce good work, guess what? Dale, your wife's going to get tapped again to do it. She's going to be the go-to person because the senior manager knows that she does extraordinary work and he wants a nice job done on this project. And so what do? We keep going back to the well time and time again, and it's not fair to the rest of the workforce, and it's definitely not fair to your wife to have to continue to carry a heavy load. To your question about when do you go to a superior to bring this up, that's a tough question. I'm not sure I have a distinct answer, but I'll offer this. I would hope that the senior managers and senior leaders within an organization creates a culture that they want to understand what is actually transpiring within the ranks, and that they eagerly encourage fierce conversation. So when, if there's opportunity for a one-on-one, that maybe you offer this in a very polite and respectful way, that, hey boss, I just feel like maybe I'm doing more than the lion's share of the work on this. Maybe we bring in a contractor, maybe bring in a mentor, maybe allow me a little bit more time on this project so that I can mentor and teach others and give them more responsibilities and do some direct tasking. Maybe we think of a different way to actually accomplish work in doing Kanbans, if you're familiar with that, and do the projects as scrums. And I know I'm probably talking in tongues to some people, but there are methodologies by which you can actually do work differently that puts demands more equally across a given group of people to accomplish the work. So I offer that. Now in the aviation segment, because now you talked about where is the tripwire for safety. And I think, again, in a safety organization, that's why culture is so important, and a leader needs to make sure that the culture is understood, that people need to be not only feel encouraged to report, but have a sense of obligation to do so. And like I said before, the best intelligence you have is in the trenches. And if you're sitting in your office with the door closed and you're isolated from this, and when something bad happens and you start asking the questions, well, how come I didn't know about this? Then there's only one place to look, and that's in the mirror, because you didn't have the right culture set where people felt like they could freely bring information forward in a polite and respectful way, of course. But that's what I would offer to you, Dale. And I don't empathize with your wife. It's a very difficult situation. It happens all the time. Know the feeling. But I would say maybe see if there's opportunity for a one-on-one with the boss. And I know it's delicate because you go, I don't want to show any chinks in my armor and put my own job security at risk. Hopefully that's not the situation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for the question, Dale. I mean, that's really good. These are tough leadership challenges and interpersonal relationship challenges that we all face.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks, Dale. It's good to hear from you. We'll just do one more round then. Any final questions for Tom?
Yeah, good morning. Tom, this is Greg Jolda from University of Maine at Augusta. I had been through the Air Force with the leadership, not quite as you have, but I realized through my training that leadership principles can be taught, in books, but heart of leadership comes from much earlier on in the development. Would you mind spending a couple of minutes about your background, probably as an early child, or what might have formed these principles in your heart before you got to the point of exerting and extending them in the Air Force, in the Navy?
Great question, Greg. Appreciate that. Yeah, I do give a lot of credit to my parents and family, and you're absolutely right. So as we build our portfolio of experience and how we want to treat others, and I've seen articles on this and briefings about is there such thing as born leaders? James Albright, if you're familiar with James and Code 7700, outstanding website, and James eagerly engages in these types of very difficult conversations. And I think there was a reprint on an article he wrote for Aviation Week, or Business and Commercial Aviation, on this very subject, that many officers went to these various leadership schools, which are quite good. I'm not knocking these leadership schools, but yet we still see leadership failures at very high levels. And it begs the question, okay, well, where's the disconnect here? Well, again, I think it goes back to really human nature in most cases, but when you look more broadly at it, there's a lot of success too that we probably don't really highlight as much as we should. And then, I'm a byproduct of public schools in Kentucky, and I'm not knocking public schools in Kentucky, but that was kind of my roots. But my aviation passion started very young. I feel like I was born an aviation nut, and got my dream job as a teenager pumping gas and cleaning airplanes at the local airport. And that's how I paid for my flying lessons, which my parents fully supported. And interestingly, the only way I could get a date with a girl in high school was to take her flying. But the parents allowed it, which you think about it in today's world, that'd be crazy to let some 17-year-old take your daughter flying. But I felt like because of the responsibility that was instilled by my parents, that we would call when I would tell them exactly what we were doing, how long we would be flying, and then we would call them as soon as we were safe on the ground. We did that. We didn't have cell phones back then, so we'd have to get to a phone booth. But just those kind of little things stack up. And then I was blessed to be able to go to the Naval Academy. And they really do focus a lot on leadership skills, leadership development, and there's a lot of case studies. And so, as you mentioned, Greg, on these various schools, I mean, we do look at various leaders and how they handle various situations, and that just adds to our portfolio of experience. And then, really, you just got to do it. You got to kind of throw yourself in immersively and engage with people and do people leadership things, and that's where you really get the experience. And look, you're going to make decisions you're going to regret. You're going to really think hard and critique yourself on the decisions you made. Hopefully at the end of the day, you look back and you go, well, I think I did right on that one, or maybe I didn't do as well as I thought I should have, and I'll make a course correction going forward.
Thanks, Greg, for asking that.
Hi, this is Shirley Phillips. I'm an adjunct faculty member at SNHU. I also teach aviation safety, and I was just curious how you would have handled the scenario that you presented at the beginning. It seems to me it's a safety culture issue.
That's right. So I think, gosh, Shirley, it's interesting how you turn this all the way back on me and nobody's given me an answer yet. So here's a couple of options that you as the director of operations might approach this. So you had already set some COVID protocols in place that you thought were effective, and that is that we're going to do temperature screenings coming into the facility. There's an expectation on not traveling or staying in hotels, et cetera. And we're generally just being cautious when we're not in the workplace. And that if we had any contact traced exposure that we would quarantine until we got a negative test. So again, the scenario, which I didn't explicitly state, would have accommodated all those different elements. And here we are, we said that we're gonna wear masks when we're not able to socially distant in the workplace, but because that we had decided that we weren't gonna wear masks on the flight deck for various reasons. And there has been quite a raging debate on this, by the way, in terms of the safety implications of actually wearing the mask and being able to do quick don masks if there's a pressurization issue, communication issues, fatigue and whatnot. I mean, you can argue it strongly on both sides. And then of course, we're still arguing whether the masks are all that effective anyway. I think it's probably reasonable in terms of risk assumption to not wear a mask on the flight deck. Let's just take it for, as the director of operations, that's my stand, and that was the protocols that we put in place. So now this captain has changed his tune and is no longer comfortable. So that's the dynamic that has changed. So I guess my first strategy would be to go back to him and see if I could maybe talk him back from the ledge a little bit on wearing the mask. And then maybe put the principal in a different seat further back in the cabin, or some other strategy there. Because really the only other alternative at that point is to address the principal, and that's probably not what you want to do right out of the gate. Because that principal might know the protocols that are in place, maybe had been complying with those, which you appreciate. And then all of a sudden, now he's going to ask the tough questions on why one of your pilots is no longer willing to comply. What changed? You know, is the threat level higher now for some reason? Those kind of questions you probably don't want to be exposed to or caught flat-footed on without a solid answer. So let me throw it back to you, Shirley. How would you have addressed this?
I was thinking that it is more of a organizational issue, a safety culture issue, and that if the pilot is uncomfortable, then that's a safety issue. So that needs to be addressed. And so I would go to the pilot and try to find out what the real crux to the issue is, because if ultimately they're going to be uncomfortable and stressed during the whole flight, then that impacts safety.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's a point that's easily missed. And I feel the same way. So my wife and I, we'll take weekend $100 hamburger runs to just get out of the house and get away. But I make the phone calls ahead to the restaurants and to the FBOs to see if they're practicing any protocols at all. And most are. That's not always the case, but recently had lunch at a local restaurant, and although they had cleaning protocols in place, they were not doing table blocking and socially distancing, even outside, which made me very uncomfortable. So I didn't enjoy lunch at all because I just felt uncomfortable. And so that there's stress there. And I agree with you 100%. And that's a distraction. And that's probably something you don't want on the flight deck. You want everybody to be comfortable and confident so that you don't have these issues. Now, I actually flew an instrument proficiency check with one of our local guys, and I wore my mask. It was hot, it was uncomfortable. It didn't affect communications with the boom microphone. It wasn't a big deal. I did ask this question of one of the chief instructors at Liberty University about how they were, what protocols they had in place to do flight training at the time. They were not doing flight training in the airplanes. So this was pretty early on. And so I was thinking, okay, maybe I've got a patent idea here. Maybe we could have a little drop down clear plastic barrier in between people in the front seats of the airplane that's cut where you can still access the engine controls sufficiently. He didn't really like that idea. So at the time they were still kind of just doing distance learning and simulators. But yeah, I think the point was that I was trying to make was, I think we got to think out of the box too a little bit here so that we get back to some level of operation with an acceptable level of risk.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
These are great questions. Really, really great. And I love bringing the collegiate training aspect into this as well. So I think I'll ask for one more question. Is there anybody else that has a question for Tom?
Why people are maybe giving that some thought. Tom, if I could maybe put a plug in for some other events that may be of interest to your staff and student population. Next week, we're going to do a session as part of the Wyvern webinar series. So this is every Wednesday at 1 p.m. East. Wyvern has been hosting these webinar events, and Andrew Day's been doing an outstanding job on hosting these and bringing in some really powerful speakers. And I'm not talking about me, by the way, even though I've done a couple sessions for him. Next week, we have Tricia Kaufman speaking, and her experience in probably the worst of situations in being notified that one of your loved ones was involved in a business aviation accident. Her husband was lost in the Circuit City citation accident in 2005. So to hear it from the family perspective is very powerful, especially for those that have to consider critical incident response. So that's something that you might want to maybe put in your calendar is sign up for those notifications. If anybody wants more information, I'll forward that to you, Dom, and then you can maybe shoot that out to your attendee list here. And those are quite good. And then the recordings for the MBAA Safety Week are available at no cost for a period of time. I'm not sure how much longer that's going to go, but those are all cataloged now in the learning management system on the MBAA website, and again, are free for folks to view. And the single pilot safety stand down, there's several good, I think, presentations there that may be of interest to folks if they are compelled to sit in front of a computer even longer and watch a recorded version.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind sending us that information, we can definitely send that out to those in attendance. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and this is, I think, how we all share and learn together. I think the sharing part of this is critically important. I don't know if you all do have a flight data monitoring program, but I equate this to participating in a SIAS, the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing Program that MITRE runs on behalf of the FAA. Very, very powerful program. And we're starting to see more universities and the general aviation segment starting to submit their data. Even the kind of the crumb catcher data logger programs, ForeFlight and others are useful. So this is getting more and more sophisticated. Moore's law and miniaturization is working in our favor to be able to actually contribute to the larger safety system by submitting data to be aggregated and analyzed in this way can really make the system much safer for us. We've already seen ATC changes, approaches changed, really quite impressive. So.
see if anybody has any more questions. It's funny, you know, with flight data monitoring and everything, you mentioned using ForeFlight now, and I've seen firsthand, you know, with schools that don't have more modern equipment, you know, ones that might be flying a 1960s or 1970s 152, you know, that school now uses Cloud Ahoy or ForeFlight or some other form of data monitoring that's reported back to management. So, you know, someone's doing approaches at negative 2,000 feet per minute for whatever reason, you know, the chief instructor or the management gets notified, which is really neat. So it's nice to bring that new technology even into older fleets. It really seems to help.
I think, again, it goes back to building that trust, right? So if people know that it's not a snitch tool, that, you know, it's okay to have an exceedance, a caution or warning event, whatever is programmed in the parametrics. The whole point is learning from it. So whether you're using it as a proactive playback tool for debriefing, which I think is very powerful and helpful, that's great. And then, you know, even though it does have a compliance function to it to monitor the safety performance of the organization, the idea is it's de-identified and used for the purpose of safety improvement, not for punitive measures.
Absolutely. That's such an important thing with the safety culture too, is the, you know, the just culture and non-punitive action, you know, especially in smaller flight training environments where you might have only, you know, 30 people utilizing airplanes, you know, using that data to improve upon procedures rather than punitive action. I completely agree with that. Let me ask the audience one more time, Tom, okay? Does anybody have any questions before we conclude? I think everyone's just about as blown away as I was. So thank you, Tom. That was really great.
Well, either that or we're still a little groggy from watching dueling town halls last night. But look, if I could, I just wanted to commend you, Dom and Lisa, for putting the program together. I think this is very important, and it's great that you are doing this and sharing it outside of the southern New Hampshire community. I very much appreciate that, and wish you guys all the best up there in your program. And again, honored to be a part of today's program.
Thank you, Tom. We were so happy to have you today. And that presentation, I think, just resonates with every organization, every organizational person here. I was taking notes offline with my screen off the whole entire time. And there's just so much to learn from higher functioning, higher order organizations that can impact, you know, our flight schools significantly. For those of you who were in attendance that may have come in late, I will have this recording uploaded sometime over the weekend or early next week for your reference. And we'll send out a mass email to everyone just to note where it is. And if you were looking for NBAA CAM credit or for FA Wings credit, again, please email us snusafety@snu.edu. Lisa and I will get to work on that early next week. Make sure you get your credit. Thank you, everybody. We'll be reconvening at 10:30 for Rita Castonguay Hunt on her presentation for UAS and Class E measures in UAS Aerospace. We hope to see you there. And again, Tom, thank you so much. That was excellent.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that.
Nope, thank you all. Have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of your program today.
Thank you.